Before labels and prescriptions, healing lived in cast iron pots and handwritten recipes, simmering through winter kitchens where garlic, broth, and patience did their quiet work. No one measured nutrients. They trusted what returned strength, meal after meal. Chicken soup was not called medicine, but people returned to it when something felt off inside. The broth simmered for hours, sometimes all afternoon, filling the house with a smell that felt closer to care than food. Mothers stood at stoves, skimming foam, adding salt by instinct. The bones gave up something that store-bought versions never did. A richness that settled deep in the chest, that made breathing feel easier when a cold had taken hold. It was served in wide bowls, often with crackers broken on top, and eaten slowly while the body remembered what it felt like to be warm from the inside. No one questioned why it worked, they just knew it did, and just beyond this, there was another dish that carried the same quiet purpose. Beef liver and onions sat on dinner tables more often than most people today would believe. It was not glamorous. It was not something children asked for, but it was something mothers insisted on, especially when someone looked pale or tired for too long. The liver was sliced thin, soaked in milk to soften the taste, then fried quickly in butter with onions that turned soft and sweet. It tasted strong, metallic, like the earth itself. People ate it because they had been told to, because their own mothers had served it the same way, because there was an unspoken understanding that it put something back into the blood. It did not need to be explained. It was simply done. But this was only one part of a larger rhythm people followed without thinking. Oatmeal with milk and honey appeared on breakfast tables in the cold months, thick and steaming in bowls that burned fingertips. It was made on the stovetop, stirred constantly to keep it from sticking, and served plain except for a drizzle of honey and a splash of milk poured into the center. People ate it before work, before school, before long days that required steadiness. It sat heavy in the stomach in a way that felt like fuel, like something that would last. There was no talk of fiber or nutrients. There was only the knowledge that it held you through the morning, that it kept hunger at bay when lunch was still hours away. It was not exciting. It was reliable, and reliability in those years was its own kind of comfort. Collard greens with bone broth were cooked low and slow, sometimes for an entire afternoon, until the leaves turned soft and dark and the pot liquor at the bottom became something people drank from cups. The greens were chopped roughly, tossed into a pot with ham hocks or chicken bones, seasoned with salt and a little vinegar. The smell was bitter and earthy, and it filled kitchens in a way that announced what kind of household it was. People ate them with cornbread, using the bread to soak up the broth, and they did it often. Not because it was fashionable, but because it was what grew, what lasted, what filled the table when other things ran short. The body seemed to know what to do with it. It did not stand alone. It belonged to a pattern most people never questioned. Baked apples with cinnamon were made when apples were too soft to eat raw, when they had sat in the fruit bowl too long and needed purpose. The cores were carved out, the centers filled with butter, brown sugar, and cinnamon, then baked until the skins wrinkled and the insides turned to something close to jam. They were served warm, sometimes with a spoonful of cream, and eaten with a spoon that scraped the soft flesh from the skin. It was not called dessert exactly, it was something gentler than that. Something given to children with upset stomachs, to elders who had trouble chewing, to anyone who needed sweetness without heaviness. The cinnamon made the house smell like safety. And just beyond this, there was another dish that carried the same quiet purpose. Rice pudding was made from what was left over, from rice that had been cooked for dinner and needed a second life. It was simmered slowly with milk, sugar, and a little vanilla, stirred often so it would not burn, until it thickened into something soft and warm. It was served in small bowls, sometimes with a sprinkle of cinnamon on top, and eaten while still warm from the stove. People gave it to children before bed, to anyone who had been sick and needed something easy to keep down. It did not demand much from the body. It asked for nothing. It simply offered warmth and weight and a kind of sweetness that felt like being cared for. No one explained it. They just kept making it. Vegetable stew was what happened when the crisper drawer was full and the week was ending. Carrots, potatoes, turnips, onions, whatever was there, chopped into rough pieces and simmered together in water or broth until everything softened into one flavor. It was thick, plain, and eaten with bread that soaked up the liquid at the bottom of the bowl. There was no recipe. There was only instinct and repetition. People ate it when money was tight, when the weather turned cold, when the body needed something simple and filling. It did not not taste like much on its own, but it did something quieter. It steadied the stomach, it filled the gaps, it reminded the body what it meant to be fed. But this was only one part of a larger rhythm people followed without thinking. Mashed sweet potatoes with butter were softer and sweeter than the white kind, and they appeared on tables in the fall and winter when the air turned sharp. The potatoes were boiled until they fell apart under a fork, then mashed with butter and a little salt, sometimes a touch of brown sugar. The color was bright, almost orange, and the texture was smooth in a way that felt easier to eat than regular potatoes. People served them to children, to anyone, recovering from illness, to elders whose appetites had begun to fade. They went down easy. They did not fight the stomach, and there was something in them that felt like light, even in the middle of winter. It did not stand alone. It belonged to a pattern most people never questioned. Bone broth was not something people talked about, but it was always simmering somewhere. After a roast chicken or a pot of beef stew, the bones were saved, tossed into a pot with water, onion scraps, carrot ends, and celery leaves, then left to cook for hours, sometimes overnight. The kitchen filled with a smell that was both rich and faintly sweet, and by morning, the liquid had turned golden and thick. It was strained, salted, and kept in jars in the refrigerator, used as the base for soups, stews, and gravies. People drank it from mugs when they felt weak, when their joints ached, when the cold had settled into their bones. It was not called healing. It was just what you did, and just beyond this, there was another dish that carried the same quiet purpose. Cornbread was baked in cast iron skillets that had been seasoned over decades, passed down from one cook to the next. The batter was simple: cornmeal, buttermilk, eggs, a little sugar, sometimes none, poured into a hot buttered skillet and baked until the edges crisped and the center stayed soft. It was served warm, split open, and spread with butter that melted into the grain. People ate it with greens, with beans, with stew, with anything that left a little liquid on the plate. It was filling in a way that felt honest, that did not pretend to be more than it was. It soaked up what was left. It finished the meal. It asked for nothing but gave back something solid. Buttermilk biscuits were made in the morning, mixed quickly with cold butter and rolled out on floured counters, cut into rounds and baked until they rose high and golden. The smell alone was enough to wake the house. They were eaten hot, split down the middle, layered with butter or jam or gravy, and they disappeared fast. People made them when someone was sick, when the morning felt too heavy, when comfort was needed and there was no time to say so out loud. The buttermilk gave them a tang that cut through the richness of the butter, and the texture was both flaky and tender, something that melted on the tongue. They were not complicated. They were just there, reliable and warm. But this was only one part of a larger rhythm people followed without thinking. Stewed tomatoes were made from canned tomatoes in the winter, and fresh ones in the summer, cooked down with a little onion, salt, and sometimes a piece of bread torn into chunks to thicken the sauce. The tomatoes broke apart as they simmered, turning soft and sweet, and the liquid became something close to soup. People ate them over rice, over toast, or straight from the bowl with a spoon. It was not fancy. It was not meant to impress, but it was something the body seemed to want when it felt sluggish, when digestion had slowed, when everything else felt too heavy. The acidity woke something up inside. It did not stand alone. It belonged to a pattern most people never questioned. Cabbage soup was what people made when the cupboard was nearly bare and the week had stretched too long. A head of cabbage, an onion, maybe a carrot, maybe a potato, all chopped and simmered in water or broth until the cabbage turned soft and sweet. It was thin, pale and plain, but it filled bowls and stomachs and kept hunger quiet. People ate it when they were sick, when they needed something light, when their stomachs had been upset for days. It did not demand much from the body. It asked for nothing, and somehow that was exactly what was needed. And just beyond this, there was another dish that carried the same quiet purpose. Egg custard was baked in small dishes, made from eggs, milk, sugar, and a little vanilla, whisked together and set in a water bath until the centers barely trembled. It was smooth, soft, and eaten with a spoon that slid through without resistance. People made it for children, for anyone who had been sick and needed something gentle, something that would not upset a fragile stomach. It tasted like sweetness without weight, like care without words. The eggs gave it body, the milk made it easy, and the warmth, even after it had cooled, seemed to linger in the chest long after the last bite. Tuna salad was made from canned tuna, mayonnaise, a little celery for crunch, and maybe a spoonful of pickle relish. It was mixed in a bowl, spread on bread or crackers, and eaten for lunch, often standing at the counter. It was simple, fast, and filling in a way that did not weigh the body down. People made it when they needed protein, when they were tired, when cooking felt felt like too much. The tuna was soft, easy to chew, easy to swallow, and the mayonnaise made it go down smooth. It was not glamorous. It was not something anyone bragged about, but it was there always when it was needed. But this was only one part of a larger rhythm people followed without thinking. Peanut butter sandwich was made with 2 slices of bread, a thick layer of peanut butter, and nothing else, or sometimes a drizzle of honey. The peanut butter was the kind that separated in the jar, with oil pooling on top, and it had to be stirred before spreading. It stuck to the roof of the mouth, required a glass of milk to wash it down, and filled the stomach in a way that lasted for hours. People ate it when there was no time, when the body needed something solid, when hunger had come on fast. It was not complicated. It was not meant to be. It was just fuel, plain and reliable. It did not stand alone. It belonged to a pattern most people never questioned. Boiled eggs with salt were peeled still warm, the shells cracking under thumbs, and eaten with a little salt sprinkled on top. They were made in batches, kept in the refrigerator, and eaten throughout the week. For breakfast, for lunch, for a snack when nothing else would do. The yolks were bright yellow, the whites firm, and the taste was clean and simple. People ate them when they felt weak, when their bodies needed something easy to digest, something that would not sit heavy. The eggs asked for nothing. They gave back protein, energy, steadiness. They were not exciting. They were just there. And just beyond this, there was another dish that carried the same quiet purpose. Creamed spinach was made from fresh spinach, cooked down until it wilted, then mixed with butter, cream, and a little flour to thicken the sauce. It turned dark green, almost black, and it tasted rich and earthy. People served it as a side dish, often with meat, and they insisted it be eaten, especially by children, even when the children resisted. The spinach was soft, easy to chew, and the cream made it go down smooth. There was an understanding, passed down without words, that it put something back into the blood, that it helped when someone looked pale or tired. No one had to explain it. It was simply done. Barley soup was thick and chewy, made with barley, broth, carrots, celery, and sometimes a little beef or chicken. The barley swelled as it cooked, soaking up the liquid, and the soup became almost like a stew by the time it was done. It was served hot, in wide bowls, and eaten slowly. People made it in the winter, when the cold settled deep, when the body needed something that would last. The barley was filling in a way that felt different from rice or pasta. Heavier, more substantial, like it anchored the body from the inside. It did not stand alone. It belonged to a pattern most people never questioned. Homemade applesauce was made from apples that had been peeled, cored, and simmered with a little water and sugar until they broke apart into mush. It was smooth, sweet, and served warm or cold, often in small bowls as a side dish. People gave it to children, to anyone with an upset stomach, to anyone who needed something soft and easy. The apples were gentle. They did not fight the body, and the sweetness felt like comfort, like being cared for without being fussed over. It was not medicine, but it was close. And just beyond this, there was another dish that carried the same quiet purpose. Gravy with pan drippings was made from what was left in the pan after frying chicken or roasting meat, the browned bits, the fat, the juice. Flour was stirred in, then milk or broth whisked until it thickened into something rich and savory. It was poured over mashed potatoes, over biscuits, over rice, and it made everything taste like it had been made with care. People ate it when they needed something comforting, something that felt like home. The fat gave it richness, the drippings gave it depth, and the body somehow knew what to do with it. It did not stand alone. It belonged to a pattern most people never questioned. Baked beans were cooked, low and slow, sometimes for hours, with molasses, brown sugar, a little mustard, and bacon or salt pork. They turned thick and sweet with a sauce that clung to the beans, and they were served in heavy bowls, often with cornbread. People ate them on Saturdays, on picnics, on days when the body needed something solid and filling. The beans were soft, easy to digest, and the sweetness made them feel less like work and more like comfort. They sat warm in the stomach, and they lasted. They did not ask for much. They just gave back steadily, quietly, the way good food should. Chicken and rice was made in one pot, with chicken pieces browned first, then simmered with rice, broth, and a little onion until everything cooked together. The rice soaked up the chicken flavor, and the whole dish turned soft and easy to eat. People made it when someone was sick, when the body needed something simple, something that would not upset a fragile stomach. It was warm, filling, and gentle. It did not demand much. It just sat there, doing its work quietly, the way most healing things did. And just beyond this, there was another dish that carried the same quiet purpose. Scrambled eggs with butter were cooked slowly, stirred constantly, until they formed soft, creamy curds that never quite set firm. They were eaten for breakfast, for dinner, for any meal when the body needed something easy. The butter made them rich, and the slow cooking made them tender. People ate them when they felt weak, when their stomachs were upset, when nothing else would stay down. The eggs were soft enough to melt on the tongue, and they went down without resistance. They were not complicated. They were just there, reliable and kind. But this was only one part of a larger rhythm people followed without thinking. Turnip greens were cooked the same way as collards, low and slow with ham hocks or bacon, until the greens turned soft and the pot liquor became something worth drinking. They tasted bitter and earthy, and people ate them with cornbread, using the bread to soak up the broth. They were not sweet, they were not easy, but they were something the body seemed to want, especially in the winter, especially when the cold had settled deep. The bitterness woke something up inside, the broth warmed from the core, and the routine of eating them week after week became its own kind of medicine. Potato soup was made from potatoes, onions, milk, and butter, simmered together until the potatoes broke apart and thickened the soup. It was pale, creamy, and simple, served in bowls with a little salt and pepper on top. People made it when the cupboard was nearly bare, when the body needed something easy, when comfort was required but words were not. The potatoes were filling, the milk made it smooth, and the warmth settled in the stomach like a hand on a shoulder. It did not stand alone. It belonged to a pattern most people never questioned. Molasses bread was dark, dense, and slightly doise. Sweet made with molasses, whole wheat flour, and sometimes a little rye. It was baked in loaf pans, sliced thick, and spread with butter. People ate it for breakfast, for snacks, for something solid when hunger came on fast. The molasses gave it a richness that white bread never had, and the bread itself felt heavier, more substantial, like it would last longer in the body. It was not light, it was not delicate, but it was steady, and steadiness in those years was worth more than flash. And just beyond this, there was another dish that carried the same quiet purpose. Milk toast was made for people who were sick, who could not keep much down, who needed something soft and easy. Bread was toasted lightly, then soaked in warm milk sweetened with a little sugar or honey, sometimes sprinkled with cinnamon. It turned soggy, almost like pudding, and it was eaten with a spoon. It was not glamorous. It was not something anyone asked for when they felt well. But when the body was weak, when the stomach was fragile, it was exactly what was needed. The milk was gentle, the bread was soft, and together they asked for nothing but gave back warmth. Lentil soup was thick and earthy, made with lentils, broth, carrots, celery, and sometimes a ham bone for flavor. The lentils broke apart as they cooked, thickening the soup until it was almost stew-like, and it was served with bread for soaking up what was left in the bowl. People made it when money was tight, when the body needed something filling, when the cold had settled in and would not leave. The lentils were soft, easy to digest, and they sat warm in the stomach for hours. They were not fancy, they were not meant to be, but they were there, dependable and kind. It did not stand alone. It belonged to a pattern most people never questioned. Herbal tea was brewed from mint leaves, chamomile flowers, or whatever grew in the garden, steeped in hot water and sipped slowly. It was not coffee, it was not strong, but it was something people turned to when their stomachs hurt, when they could not sleep, when the day had been too much and they needed something gentle to close it. The warmth alone was enough sometimes. The steam cleared the head, and the ritual of sitting with a cup, of letting the heat seep into the hands, became its own kind of medicine. No one explained it. They just kept brewing it, and the body somehow always knew what to do. They were never called medicine, just meals repeated until the body understood them. Nothing hidden, nothing rare. A pot on the stove, a recipe remembered, a quiet trust in what worked. Maybe healing was always this simple. If this stirred something familiar, subscribe. There is more waiting to be remembered.